Nobody on that claim expected the ground to change everything. What started as a routine scan on an overlooked stretch of frozen dirt would soon turn into a story that mining crews across the country couldn't stop talking about. Before this video ends, you're going to see the moment a quiet, forgotten claim turned into what some geologists are now calling one of the richest gold systems ever pulled from the earth. Stick around, because what happens in the next 20 minutes changes how you'll look at every worthless claim ever passed over. And if you love raw, high-stakes mining stories like this one, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because we bring you the biggest discoveries in the business before anyone else does. Colt Bracken had been mining for almost 2 decades, and if there was one thing he'd learned, it was that the ground rarely gives up its secrets easily. The claim his crew had taken on that season wasn't glamorous. It had been passed over by 3 other outfits in the last 10 years, each one deciding it wasn't worth the fuel to run the equipment out there. Colt saw it differently. He'd read the old survey notes, noticed a few inconsistencies in how the previous crews had drilled, and figured there was at least a chance nobody had actually tested the ground the right way. So his team rolled in with ground-penetrating radar, a portable drill rig, and enough patience to do things properly instead of quickly. The first 2 weeks were slow. Test holes came back with trace amounts of gold. Nothing that would make headlines, nothing that would even cover the diesel bill. A few of the younger guys on the crew started grumbling, wondering if this was going to be another season chasing shadows. Colt kept them steady. He'd seen claims turn on a single afternoon before, and he wasn't about to pull the plug just because the first 2 weeks were quiet. Then came test hole 11. The core sample that came up out of the ground looked different from anything they'd pulled so far. Heavier, denser. When they ran it through the wash plant that evening, the pan came back loaded in a way nobody on site had seen in years. At first, everyone assumed it was a fluke, a rich little pocket that would run dry within a few feet. That's how it usually goes. You get excited, you chase it, and 2 days later you're back to scraping bedrock for pennyweights. So Colt did what any experienced miner does before letting hope get ahead of the evidence. He ordered more holes, spread out in a grid around the original strike, instead of digging straight down into the one good spot. If this was a real deposit and not a lucky pocket, the surrounding ground should tell the same story. It did. Hole 12 came back strong. So did 13. By the time hole 16 showed the same mineral signature as the others, the crew wasn't talking about a lucky pocket anymore. They were talking about something that ran wide and ran deep, something that didn't behave like the small, isolated deposits they were used to finding. Colt walked the site alone that evening after the crew had knocked off for the day. He crouched down at the edge of the newest test hole, turned a piece of gravel over in his fingers, and felt something he hadn't felt on a claim in a long time, the sense that the ground underneath him might hold more than he'd bargained for. Word travels fast in a small mining community, even when nobody's trying to spread it. Within days, other outfits working claims nearby started asking questions. Was Bracken's crew really pulling numbers like that out of claim everyone else had written off? Colt kept his answers short, until they had lab-verified assay results and a real handle on how far the deposit extended. He wasn't going to make promises to anyone, least of all himself. He'd watched too many miners get ahead of their own evidence and end up mortgaging equipment against a deposit that turned out to be nothing more than a rich streak 3 feet wide. So the crew shifted into a different gear. Instead of chasing the excitement, they slowed down and got methodical. Every sample got logged with its exact depth and coordinates. Every bucket that came off the wash plant got weighed and recorded before a single ounce left the site. Colt brought in an independent assay lab out of state, one with no ties to his operation, specifically so nobody could accuse him of cooking the numbers later. He wanted this proven the hard way, or not proven at all. The lab results started coming back 2 weeks later, and they didn't disappoint. Sample after sample showed consistent, high-grade gold content across a stretch of ground nearly 400 yards wide. That kind of consistency is what separates a real deposit from a lucky strike. A lucky strike gives you one great number surrounded by a lot of disappointing ones. What Colt's crew was pulling and looked like a genuine or body something that had been sitting under that overlooked claim for who knows how many decades, waiting for somebody to drill in the right spot. Even with results like that in hand, Colt refused to let the crew get ahead of themselves. He called a meeting at the site trailer and laid out the plan in plain terms. No full-scale excavation until they had a proper geological model of how the deposit sat underground. No heavy equipment moved onto unstable ground without an engineer signing off, and no public claims about value until an independent reserve estimate had been completed by people with no financial stake in the outcome. Some of the younger crew members pushed back a little, eager to start moving dirt in a big way. Colt held his ground. "We didn't find this by rushing," he told them. "We're not going to lose it that way either." Over the following month, the operation expanded carefully. More core samples came up from greater depths, and the geological model on the office wall kept filling in piece by piece until it started to resemble something nobody on that crew had seen before, a genuine large-scale system, not a shallow pocket that would play out in the season. Engineers flown in to review the site data confirmed what Colt already suspected. This wasn't a fluke of geology. It was the kind of deposit that mining companies spend millions of dollars searching for and rarely find. That's when the numbers started circulating. Based on the grade of the samples, the width of the deposit, and rough estimates of how deep it likely extended, independent geologists floated a preliminary figure. Something in the range of $300 million in recoverable gold, if the deposit held its shape and grade across its full extent. Colt was careful with how he talked about that number publicly. He understood the difference between a geologist's early estimate and a confirmed reserve, and he wasn't interested in overselling something that still needed months of verification. But even with all his caution, it was hard to deny what the site was telling everyone who walked it. Something extraordinary was sitting under that ground. News of the find rippled through the wider mining community fast. Crews that had worked claims within a few miles of Bracken's site suddenly found themselves fielding calls from investors wanting to know if their ground might hold something similar. Old-timers who'd mined that region for 30 years came out just to see the core samples for themselves, shaking their heads at how a deposit that size could have sat undisturbed for so long. Some speculated that earlier crews simply hadn't drilled deep enough or in the right pattern to ever hit it. Others thought the technology Colt's team used, modern ground-penetrating radar paired with a much tighter drilling grid, was the real difference maker, catching signals that older equipment would have missed entirely. Not everyone was convinced the number would hold up. Veteran geologists who'd seen early estimate balloon and then shrink back down to reality cautioned that nothing was official until a full excavation and independent reserve audit were complete. They'd seen too many biggest strike in year stories fade into ordinary, modest claims once the real digging started. Colt didn't argue with them. If anything, he agreed. He kept repeating the same line to anyone who asked, on camera or off. The ground would tell the truth eventually, and until it did, nobody should treat an early estimate like a guaranteed payday. Still, the operational shift on site was impossible to ignore. Heavy equipment that had been parked for the season came rumbling back to life. A second wash plant was trucked in to keep up with processing volume. Colt brought on extra crew, most of them experienced hands from operations that had shut down elsewhere in the region, all of them eager to be part of what was starting to look like the find of a career. Safety briefings became a daily ritual before any machine moved an inch of dirt. Ground stability checks happened after every excavation pass. Colt had seen too many good discoveries turn into disasters because somebody got greedy with depth or timing, and he wasn't going to let that happen on his watch. As excavation progressed layer by layer, the visual evidence started matching the lab data in a way that even the most skeptical crew members couldn't dismiss. The color and texture of the material coming up changed exactly where the geological model predicted it would. Pockets of visible gold. Not just trace flakes, but chunks heavy enough to feel the weight in your palm, started turning up in the wash plant sluice on a near-daily basis. For a crew that had spent 2 frustrating weeks at the start of the season wondering if this claim was worth the effort, the shift in mood was staggering. People who'd been ready to write the season off were now working double shifts just to keep pace with what the ground was giving up. Colt made a point of keeping meticulous records through all of it, knowing that a discovery this size would eventually draw scrutiny from regulators, investors, and skeptical competitors alike. Every load weighed, every assay filed, every drill log cross-referenced against the site map. He wanted there to be no question, when the final numbers came in, that this had been done properly from the first test hole to the last bucket of ore. By the time the independent reserve estimate was finally commissioned, the mining world had one question on its mind. Would the number hold, or would this turn out to be another case of early excitement outrunning the actual geology? The engineers brought in for the estimate spent weeks on site, cross-checking drill logs, running their own confirmation samples, and building an independent model separate from anything Colt's team had produced. That kind of scrutiny is exactly what Colt had asked for from start. If a deposit was real, it would survive an outside audit. If it wasn't, better to find out now than after selling shares in something that didn't exist. What made this story resonate beyond Colt's own crew was the reminder it gave the entire industry. That overlooked ground still holds surprises, and that careful, methodical work can uncover what impatience and outdated equipment missed for years. Mining outfits across the region started pulling old survey files back out, wondering if their own past overclaims deserved a second look with modern scanning technology. Investors who'd shied away from smaller operations in favor of established mines started paying closer attention to independent crews working claims nobody else wanted. Whatever the final reserve number turned out to be, the ripple effect on how people approached worthless ground had already begun. Through it all, Cole Bracken kept the same steady approach he'd had since test hole 11 first came back heavy. He didn't chase headlines. He didn't make promises he couldn't back up with lab results. He let the ground and the independent auditors do the talking, week after week, sample after sample. For a crew that started the season wondering if they'd made a mistake taking on an overlooked claim, it had turned into the kind of story that gets told around mining camps for years to come. Not because of the number attached to it, but because of how patiently and carefully that number was earned. As the final stages of verification continue, one thing is already certain. Whatever the confirmed figure ends up being, this claim has already changed how a lot of miners think about the ground they walk past every day. The next report from the independent auditors could confirm this as one of the largest verified gold discoveries in recent memory, or it could bring the estimate back down to something more modest. Either way, Colt Bracken and his crew proved that some of the richest ground left in the country isn't hiding in some remote, untouched wilderness. Sometimes it's sitting under a claim everybody else already walked away from, waiting for someone patient enough to look twice. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on, because we'll be following this claim as the final verification results come in. And trust us, this might not be the biggest discovery we bring you this year.